start this new series, Thrive, what we're going to talk about today is how do I face life's hardest disappointments, and how do I come out better on the other side of them and thrive through them? And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the Apostle Paul, because the Apostle Paul was always getting the bad end of the deal. He was always getting beat up and put in jail and arrested. And in Acts 27, towards the end of the book, what happens is he gets arrested again. He gets put on a ship that's headed towards Rome, and his ship, they hit a storm, and this storm is really violent and bad, and they go 14 days without eating. And then the sailors, they want to kill each other. And so we pick up our story there in Acts 27, verse 42, right at the end of the chapter. It says, the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by heat, fastened itself on his hand, and we'll stop there. So Paul and his crew, they shipwreck on this island called Malta off the coast of Italy, a small island. And he's with 276 men, so it's a big crew. I mean, it's half this room. And there's a lot of them, and they've gone 14 days without eating, 2 weeks without food and without water. And now it's raining, it's cold, it's a winter month. It says October or November. And they're struggling, and now he's trying to make a fire. And it says a snake jumps out at him, a viper, and he's like, I can't catch a break. It's like disappointment after disappointment. Have you had one of those weeks? Just a really bad month. Maybe you've been let go. It's just a terrible week. And what we're going to see in this story is that even though Paul is facing a terrible month and a terrible time on this island, he's going to thrive through it. And he's going to make a couple decisions that are going to help him thrive through it. And we can learn from Paul. And if we make the same decisions as him, we can thrive through any hard time in life. The first decision, and I'm going to put it up on the screen, that Paul makes is this. Paul says, this is not my destination. This island of disappointment isn't my destination. I want you to look at someone. We're going to get some energy in the room. Look at someone and say, I'm not staying here long. Oh, you got to say it. Look at a stranger. Say, I'm not staying here long. There we go. It's weird, but it's good because you're not staying here long. So I was at a staff lunch. We had a bunch of birthdays, and we were all over eating lunch, and someone started ironically talking about deserted islands, and they were saying who would survive on the island, who wouldn't survive on the island. And they looked at me and they're like, you wouldn't survive. And I was like, it's fair, I probably wouldn't. And then they were like, okay, well, Paul Gunther would survive, and Pastor Scott Swanson would survive. Then they looked at Paul and they said, now if Paul was on a deserted island alone, he would have like a shelter in place. He would have a fort with weapons. He'd have like a kitchen. He'd have Thai food in there. He'd be like the mayor. It'd be like Lord of the Flies in his own little hut that he built. It'd be great. And then someone said, but if Scott was on his own little island, Scott would have like canoes and paddle boards. And with all those new muscles he has, he'd be like paddle boarding out into the ocean, like looking around for cruise ships and trying to actually be saved. And Paul spoke up, and Paul said, well, how do you know that I don't have paddle boards in my shelter? And we said, you just wouldn't. We just know you. You would have weapons, though. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking, our island of disappointment is like that. Instead of building, canoes, and instead of building paddle boards and actually going and looking for help and leaving the place of disappointment that has hurt us, we shelter up and hunker down and stay longer than we should. And what I think we should have is this mindset that, hey, I'm not staying here long. This is just a pit stop. I'm here to fuel up. Maybe you've been lied to. Maybe you've been cheated on. Maybe someone has said you're not good enough or called you a disappointment. Maybe you were born with a handicap. Maybe someone your whole life has said you are disappointment. But I'm here to tell you this morning that no, you're not. You are actually appointed. And one of the great questions that you should be asking yourself is this. Do you know that you have appointment in Jesus Christ? Every single person in this room has a divine appointment. And you should really be seeking that appointment out. Everyone in this room, you have a divine appointment, unique from the person sitting next to you, unique from the person sitting behind you. It may not be more special than theirs, but it's unique, and your family has a divine appointment. If you haven't sought that out, if you haven't found it out or uncovered it, start to uncover what that divine appointment is. Start to seek it out. Start to pray for that. And God will start to reveal that as a family for you so that you can start to pursue it for the kingdom purposes. When Paul and his crew, they're stranded out on the ocean. This is before they got to the desert island. It says that they had gone 14 days, and it says an angel comes onto the ship, and an angel startles him and scares him and says, "Paul, I have some good news. You will make it to Rome, and you're going to stand before Caesar, and you're going to have a trial, and you're going to preach in Rome." And so Paul on the ship, he ends up going to the other guys on the crew and says, "Guys, I have good news. None of us are going to die, and we're going to make it to Rome." And what we need to understand is that Paul's divine appointment comes on the ship. Each of us, even in the middle of a storm, can feel and hear our divine appointment from God, even in the hardest storms of life. Those storms of life can come, and we have no idea what to do. Maybe it's a financial situation. Maybe you've been let go. Maybe someone has left you, and you just don't know where to turn, and those storms can really disorient you. I had a storm like that a few years back. It was when I first started seminary. It was my first year in Portland, Oregon, and it was a rough year. It might have been the rain, but I wasn't making any friends, and I told my parents, I said, "I just want to come home. I want to be back here at the Grove." And I was spending the summer here, and I was feeling like I was going to marry the girl I ended up marrying, and I said, I need to be close to home. And I started making all these plans, and with 2 weeks left of summer, I got a phone call from the office at the school, the registrar's office, and they said, "Mr. Chinchen, we have some news for you." And I'm like, oh, she's going to give me a scholarship. And she said, "Unfortunately, your credits won't transfer to our university." And I'm like, "What do you mean? I have a 4.0. How can my..." She said, "I'm sorry, have a nice day." And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was just wrecked. I didn't know what to say. And my future wife had housing lined up. I had housing lined up with a buddy. All of these things were falling through, and I felt like I was going to disappoint all these people. I was disappointed in myself. And I remember walking back to my room, and I was trying to get better at praying. This was a season where I was trying to start praying, and I started talking to God. And I said, "God, I've made all these plans for my life. I made this plan, and why is my plan not working? And why is this move not working that I wanted to do? And if you have something else planned, can you just reveal it? Can you just show me?" And I remember falling asleep that night, and I had this very vivid dream. And I was sitting in a classroom. All the chairs were lined up, and this big Texan man walked into the room. He was a friend from the Grove, a friend of my dad's, and he walked in and he said, "Listen here, son, you are not finished with school yet." And I was like, oh my gosh. And I woke up from my dream. And I took that as God telling me, hey, everything that you've been planning, the place that you picked out, the destination that you picked out, isn't what's right. I have a different destination for you, and you need to go back to Portland and finish seminary there. And I think so often we pick out a destination, but it's not the right destination. God has divinely appointed somewhere for us to move on to and for us to go. As I look at Paul's story and his journey, this is what we see. And so often, God won't speak to us in a dream. He's not going to speak all the time in a dream, and maybe he has to you, and it's very special. It can be unique. But if you're seeking God's will for your life, if you've been praying, if you're going through a storm and you're praying, "God, speak to me. God, use me. God, just tell me something," what I'd encourage you to do is use this right here. God says, "I've given you a tool. I've given you one of the greatest tools ever, and it's right here, and it's my compass." In Psalms 119, 105, it says, "By your words I can see where I am going." God says, hey, I've given you this navigation tool so that no matter the rejection letter, no matter the rejection, if you've asked someone on a date and you've been declined, hey, it's okay. No matter the financial situation that arises, it's okay. Get out your compass and use it for life's storms. What do sailors use? What did they use in ancient times? They had compass. They had a compass to know where they were going through life's storms. Modern day sailors in the fishing shows, they use a GPS system so they don't get lost on the high seas. And God says the same thing to us. He says, get out your compass and use it. I don't want you ending up with the wrong friends. I don't want you ending up with the wrong business associates. I don't want you hanging out with the wrong people for too long. Because if you do, you're never going to end up where I have called you to. And I think what happens in life is we go, oh, I've got the best tools. I've got the best 2 Bible apps, and I've got the best meditation app. It's on premium. I pay $9.99 a month for it. And I've got an NIV study Bible in my office and one at home. But what happens if you don't pull that thing out? If you're not pulling it out, even at work, if you're not listening to it on the way home, if you're not using it and dusting it off and actually listening to it, these compasses, these tools will never actually direct you, and they won't even help you. You'll be lost, especially when those storms hit. You'll go anywhere that life takes you. And I was really processing that. And can we go deeper for a second? Because I think we got to dive deep on this one. I was processing that with the sailors. So those sailors are out there for 14 days, and they're lost. They had some navigation tools that they would use back then, but they get lost. That storm was so hard, and so they end up on Malta. And I told you they end up, it's a small island off the coast of Italy. And I think we can hear a story like this, and we can go, oh, that's very nice. Malta, it sounds cool. And we can hear stories like that, like, oh, Garden of Eden, the creation narrative. That's cool, man. Maybe it exists. I don't really know. Well, it exists. We just don't really know where it is. Malta, I was reading this all week, and I Googled Malta. Can I show you a picture of it? There's Malta. I know. That's the first picture on Google. It's like, why are we not there? We're going to leave it up because it's like 118 out. So we're going to leave it up. It seems like the island of appointment now, doesn't it? It seems like we should do Missions Malta 2022 and tell Paul Gunther. Doesn't seem so bad. But I think some of the time what happens is we get stuck in a place. And what happened with the sailors is they got there and they were thinking, oh, this place, it's pretty bad. But then they started to get used to it. I bet they were walking up to Paul and they were probably saying, hey, Paul, you know, the Syrian supply chain, we were talking to Rafa over here, and Rafa, you know, we're not going to be able to get wood for a few months. I bet they wanted to stay. I bet they wanted to, it looks like a resort, and it says in this story that the people were kind to them. The islanders were bringing them food and gifts, and they hosted them. So I bet they didn't want to leave. I bet they found it very comfortable. And I bet Paul and the captain and whoever was in charge of this crew was tempted to actually say, Rome can wait. But here's the thing. 100% of the time, this is true in everybody's life, in your family's life, every person here, 100% of the time, your island of disappointment will become more beautiful and alluring. It will become more comfortable than the place that God has intended for you to go. And it's so easy to miss out on it, especially if we're not using God's word as our compass. We're going to miss the opportunity for our divine appointment. Instead of moving past the failures of life, and instead of stepping into God's future for you and your family, you can start laying down roots and putting up a home in a place that God never intended for you to live. You'll start thriving in a place that you weren't supposed to thrive in because you're not thriving. God has a place for you to go thrive in a different divine place for you and your family. And here's one of the things that we don't recognize about Paul too often. Paul's leadership abilities. Do I see any, how many leaders are in the room? None. None. Okay, any dad leaders? It's Father's Day. There we go, 1, 2, I see a few, okay. How about any female leaders? Any mom leaders? There we go. Any young leaders? Any young leaders? I need one. There's one in the back. There we go. Here's the thing that we don't recognize too often about Paul. Paul is a leader. He's not just an apostle. He's not just a disciple. But Paul's a leader, and he makes huge leadership decisions for this group. The last decision he makes is he says, guys, we're going to continue on in this journey. It's been hard. We've been disappointed. Some of you want to stay at this resort. I know I would. But we're not. We have to go to Rome, and we're going to keep going. And some of you need to do that. Maybe you've had a disappointed family member, someone that's really been struggling. maybe someone that has been struggling with mental health, and you need to say, hey, we're going to continue on in this journey. I'm going to help you, but we're going to continue on in this journey. What Malta means, Malta in Greek, it's actually Melita, and it was given by a group of Phoenician sailors a few thousand years ago, and Melita means refuge. They named it Refuge because they found it as a refuge island. And when Paul, he would have been there for a few weeks, and he would have realized after the islanders, they started bringing them gifts and feeding them, it would have been like a luau night. He was probably thinking, man, this place is great. This is my house of refuge. This is a safe haven for us and our crew. But on the flip side, what Paul would have realized is he would have thought, oddly enough, this is my island of appointment. I'm disappointed, but I'm appointed here. Maybe you've thought that. I don't want to be here, but God has put me here for a reason. I don't like these people, but God has put me with these people for a reason. And that was Paul. I mean, he's on this island. Maybe he didn't want to be there, but they start bringing him the sick. They start bringing him the elderly. He starts healing them. He starts preaching Jesus. They had never heard the gospel before. And he starts working, in a sense, with these people. But on the other hand, he's being healed. He's finding it as a house of refuge. He's finding rest, recovery. His crew's getting to recharge before they have to go out onto the water again. And in your own life and in your families, if you've ever gone through a bad season, if you've faced hard times as a family, God will give you a Malta. He'll give you a place where you can just recharge and rest. He'll give you time and space where you can reapply for jobs. He'll give you a season for that. Maybe this is not applying for you, but here's the thing. You can be a Malta family for someone else. Maybe you can be Malta people for another family or for an individual that needs it. And you can be a Malta family and say, hey, can we just give you rides? Can we cook some meals for you? Can we bring over some Malta food tonight? Maybe you can be that Malta person and start paying some bills for someone that needs it for a season. And at the end of the season, because here's the thing, Malta is only for a season. What do we know about vacation? Vacation doesn't go on forever. After a week, 2 weeks, we come back to the valley, and vacation ends. And Malta ends after a season. Paul says, guys, we must continue on in our journey. And that's what they have to do, is they have to pack up, they have to thank them for the hospitality and for the gifts and for the food, and they have to get on their ship. At the end of the Malta story, it says this in 28:11, if you go down. After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered on the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods Castor and Pollux. And so Paul says to his crew, he says, guys, some of you want to stay, but we're continuing on in this journey because what? This isn't our destination. Our destination and appointment lies ahead. And some of you have been in a place for too long. Maybe you've been in a season of not just disappointment, but maybe it's been depression for too long, and you need to move on from that place of Malta and rejuvenation and move on towards your divine appointment. I'll close with this story. When I was 16, my parents threw me a Sweet 16 birthday party. They got me a Sweet 16 car. It was a brand newish 1999 Honda Civic. And I started driving that thing around everywhere. I was going 0 to 60 in some amount of seconds. And so I was whipping around in that thing, and it only been a few weeks or so, and I'm coming home from golf practice right down the street from here. And I look up, I'm not texting and driving, and I look up, and all of a sudden this person stopped in front of me, dead stopped, and I don't have any time to react, and I just made a little contact with her, or a lot, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And so I come to my senses, and I look up, and my heart stops because I see a car seat in the back. And so I get out of the car as fast as I can, and I come around to her side of the vehicle, and I get the door open, and thank God there wasn't a baby inside. And so I get her out, she gets out, and she's fine. And then she starts yelling at me, and she's saying other things to me, and she's screaming at me, and I'm like, hold on, here's a chill pill. You just need to relax. Take it down a level. We're fine. And then the police officers show up. They start laying into me, and I'm like, oh my, what's going on? And one of them starts writing me a ticket, and I'm like, okay, like everyone needs to calm down. Then they inform me that my parents are on the way, and I'm like, this is going from bad to worse here. And I'm standing on the side of the road, the car's totaled, And I'm thinking, man, this couldn't get any worse. I've disappointed the lady here. I've disappointed the police officers. I'm disappointed in my texting and driving abilities. My parents now, as they pull up, I'm thinking, they're going to be so disappointed in me. And I see my dad walking up, and I'm thinking, I've got time to run into the desert. If I book it now, I can go. And I see him walk up, and he grabs me and embraces me. And I'm thinking, oh, hey. He says, hey, are you okay? I said, yeah. And he said, are you fine? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm fine. He said, no, are you okay? I said, well, my neck, little whiplash. He said, no, are you okay? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, why don't you go get in the car? And I said, all right. So I went and got in the car. And he finally came over to the car, and he said, well, let's go home. And we go home, and as we're driving home, just didn't feel right yet. So I said, hey, Dad, about the whole totaled car thing that's not with us. Aren't you mad? Aren't you disappointed? Anything? And he said, bud, I'm just glad you're okay. We can talk about it later. I'm just glad you're okay. And I said, oh, okay. Well, we get home, 2-3 days pass, and still didn't feel all right. So I said, I got to go find him. So I went and found him in his office, and I said, hey, Dad, got a minute? You're not mad? You're not disappointed about the whole car wreck thing? And he said, listen, bud, we're just glad you're okay. We're glad you're not hurt, and you can buy another car one day on your own. I thought, oh, there it is. So I learned a couple things about disappointment and texting and driving. Don't ever do it. But I learned about disappointment that day, and disappointment is a season we all need to move on from. If not, we can sink into depression or bad mental health. But with disappointment, yes, we need to move on from it. God has called us to a higher level. God has called us to a divine appointment with our families and individually. And so we have to continue our journey. But here's the thing. As soon as we move on from that, as soon as you said, I'm going to step out into the unknown, something bad happens. There's a small accident. There's a big accident. Disappointment is always waiting around the corner, isn't it? As soon as we step outside, it's 122 degrees. And it's just disappointing. Or someone didn't have your reservation, and it's disappointing. And it's like, life's full of disappointments, isn't it? And so my encouragement to everyone, all of you here, is this. It's to stay on board and to stay positive and to trust Christ through all of it. To the women in the room, it's this. To the moms, if you get a bad financial report with your family or a bad health report, remember this. Stay on board, stay positive, and trust Christ through it all. To the men in the room, to the fathers on Father's Day, if there's a car crash, embrace them, hug them, and stay on board, stay positive, and say, I'm here to journey with you. To the young people in the room, because there's a lot of young people in the room, to the young marriages, to the kids in the room, if a parent's disappointed you, if a spouse has recently disappointed you, remember this. Stay on board, stay positive, and trust Christ, because this isn't the final destination. This isn't your final appointment right here. God has said, I will give you a final appointment, and maybe you haven't reached it yet. So don't get so disappointed in today. And I know someone needs this so bad today, because you can get so caught up and so disappointed in the right now, in the right here. But God has something so great waiting for you, something so beautiful right around the corner. And if you'll just stay in the Word and keep trusting Him and stay with your family and keep inviting Him onto your family boat, onto that ark, to make it a safe place, God's gonna bless that. He's gonna make it the safe place you've wanted it to be. He's gonna direct that ship to the place that you were meant to land and take you to the purpose that He was saying, I've had this purpose all along for you if you would have just trusted me and used your compass. Can we go ahead and pray for that? God, I just pray over all the families here, over all the fathers here, even over all the mothers, that you just begin to show purpose. In the middle of the storm, it can be so easy to lose our purpose and to lose sight of what's important, but I pray that you start to make it clear, that you start to make it divine, that you start to put us in the right direction, and also that you keep our arks and our boats and our families a safe place and bless them, God. God, we thank you for your forgiveness, that it's new each day. We love you, Jesus, and it's in your name we pray all these things. Amen.